essay for The New Yorker, and this is kind of an expanse of that essay. And it talks about her grief and losing her mother, who was her access point to Korean culture, and also how food connects us culturally through family, through relationships. And I just, reading a book like this, I was so moved, and I cannot, hype it up enough. You guys just need to read it for yourself. But, she talks a lot about being at an intersection of two cultures, and also just the grief of losing someone. And I honestly have not read a book that I think captures grief in this kind of way since I read Joan Didion's A Year of Magical Thinking. So that is a testament to Michelle, that she was able to capture grief in this really incredible way. And it's just, again, so amazing. And before I bring Michelle on, because we are so lucky to have her on here today, even though she is very busy, I just want to read a couple of quotes that I pulled from the book. So first one is, "It felt like the world had divided into two different types of people, those who had felt pain and those who had yet to." And now I'm sure if you have lost someone that you love, you understand this. I know that I have. And it's a very sad divide, but very true. And then she also writes a beautiful quote about her mother. She says, "I remember these things clearly because that was how my mother loved you. Not through white lies and constant verbal affirmation, but in subtle observations of what brought you joy, pocketed away to make you feel comforted and cared for without even realizing it." And I will say, I think mother-daughter relationships aren't always an easy thing to capture the complexity of, and Michelle does a really amazing job of doing that, especially the transition from, mother-daughter as you grow up to having a more adult relationship with your mother, which is something that I've been lucky enough to have my mother there for, and something that Michelle, felt got cut short. And I don't want to put words in her mouth, so I would love to bring her on, but yeah, everyone needs to read this book. Let's bring her on. Hi, Milo. Excuse Milo, he would like to be on. Milo, this is not your book club. Hello!
Hi!
So much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm in LA right now, actually, and I just came from a shoot. And I think, so the person who did my hair is Rachel or Uncle Lee. Do you know them?
I love Rachel.
Yeah, she says hi. I told her that I was doing this, and she was like, "Oh, I know Kaia. She's the sweetest."
You're the best. I'm in LA too. It's so nice here right now. It's like a beautiful summer day.
Yeah, it's gorgeous here. I think we're all in major need for summer times. I'm very excited to eat Korean food here in Koreatown.
Okay, so after reading, I've never been to Korea. I mean, I've actually been to the hot springs, which are, talk about going to them. They're the best. But I've never eaten on here, and now I really feel like I need to.
Definitely.
Do you have like a favorite dish?
Yeah, I've gone to, I usually go to Hungary, which is this kalguksu place. It's like a Korean knife cut noodles. But today I think I'm going to try this place called the Crab House. It doesn't sound Korean, but there's this like raw, like fermented crab that's a Korean dish that I really like, and it's really hard to find a good one in New York, so I'm really excited to go to this place called the Crab House. But I got a bunch of really good recs on Twitter that I'm excited to check out.
Recs, because I don't know where to start, but now after, like, there were so many dishes in the book that I'd never heard of, and then after describing them I was like, I've never tried this and I'm craving now. So that is a testament to your right. But I just want to, obviously you write music and I've listened to music. I love it. But the memoir is that, do you feel like because writing music for so long that it made it almost easy to be that writing?
Yeah, I do think that there is something about being a musician, like that's unique to that medium, that people are already kind of infusing so much of your personal life into your work, and they assume to feel this kind of like intimacy or closeness to you. And I also feel like from an early age, when I started writing, I was always writing about these types of personal experiences, but it was a little bit easier because there's so much more to hide behind, you know, because you have such a limited space to sort of verbally express yourself, that it's all very impressionistic in this way that writing a memoir is not. So it was definitely a little bit more nerve-wracking to have all of this information out there.
And I also noticed in music, it can be a bit more glamour. I actually loved how in the book hide behind any of the glamour, and you were like very honest about grief in that way. I do think that, you know, it can be something that people try to make, and it actually, do you feel like for you from writing music to then writing?
Yeah, sorry, the audio is cutting out a bit, so I'm getting like half of it. But I think it was about being unflinching.
Right.
Yeah, I think honestly a big part of it for me was a big reason why I wanted to write this book to begin with. It was because there was this major feeling of no one could really understand what I endured, and I needed everyone to know in this sort of sick way, because I just felt so alone in it, and I just felt so unsure of how to explain it to people, what I had witnessed and what I had gone through. And yeah, that was a major reason I wanted to write the book, was because I needed people to sort of know and to air my grievances in this kind of way.
Right. And I loved how at the end you talk about touring Psychopomp, and how you know, in moments you just like wished your mother was there, but also realized that, you know, there was no world where she could have been there, and you could have been singing about that. Like, how was that sort of, you know, mixed emotions for you? And do you feel like you're experiencing that again with the release of this book?
Yeah, it is a really wild feeling. I mean, I'm not a religious or particularly spiritual person, but I've led a very charmed life after my mother passed away. And I had been, you know, a struggling musician for a few years before I wrote this album that was largely about my mother and her passing. And all of a sudden, I began to experience sort of creative success. But yeah, I mean, I feel like in a way, I mean, I talk about this a little bit in the book. It felt in some way, because my mom was a homemaker, I was her ultimate art, you know. And in some ways, like when the book came out and it touched so many people and it got on the bestseller list, it felt like it was something that we had accomplished together. It was like I had told our story in the way that was true, and everything that she had taught me had sort of kind of led to this moment. And yeah, I mean, I'm ultimately just really proud of it, and I feel like she would be really proud for me. It's easier to deal with now in a way than it was initially, because it was so new back then, and now I guess I have some experience of talking about it.
Right. And do you feel like writing the memoir was a form of therapy for you in like processing and dealing with that grief?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like I mean, in more ways than I could have ever anticipated. Like I feel like one thing that's really great about writing a book is that you really have to dig into the other players' like perspectives and what brought them to act the way that they did, or what happened in their past that might lead them to be the way that they are. And I feel like I was able to really forgive the people I kind of resented for some time. And also, I think I felt so much guilt about how much like shit I put my mom through in my teenage years, and I was able to kind of look back at that moment and investigate it in this new way, and find a sort of new forgiveness for myself. So it was really, really therapeutic for me. It was hard, but it was really therapeutic.
Yeah, and I think like I saw that a lot of critics were saying that every mother and daughter will find themselves in this book. And I think that's totally true. And like I said before, like it's a very complex relationship, I think, as a mother and daughter sort of grow up, and that relationship changes, did you have any intention of sort of, you know, feeling like you wanted people to be able to relate, or was it just really personal and then it happened to resonate?
Yeah, I think I tried to just explore our relationship as openly and honestly as possible, but I knew that this particular type of cruelty that is kind of associated with Asian moms, like this particular kind of critical, judgmental nature, was really important for me to capture, because it was a really big part of my mom and I's relationship. It was a really tumultuous relationship for a long time, and I had to, you know, I never like doubted that my mother loved me, but it was a really important thing that I wanted to showcase, because so much of what I felt like was really heartbreaking about losing her when I did, when I was 25, was that I feel like even if you're not Asian American, like it's like the time when you return to your parents and you can sort of see them as human beings and not just mom and dad, and their role in your life. And so I feel like when you're in your mid to late 20s, like that's sort of when you hit this sweet spot where like you can kind of become friends and confide in one another in this new way, and appreciate this sort of new relationship with one another. And that was what was so heartbreaking, was our relationship was just starting to get really good when she got sick. And yeah, so it was really important for me to kind of capture that feeling. But I also had a sense that a lot of daughters and their mothers like have this type of relationship.
Yeah, and I think, you know, there's like always the teenage years of wanting to be everything that your parents are not, especially I think with girls and their mothers. And then you slowly start to accept the fact that you are like them in a lot of ways and like celebrate it. But it does take time, and like, you know, you say you rediscovered and like kind of were able to find your mom and even your aunt and your grandma through cooking and through food. How, like, was that just always something that was really prevalent in your life, or why was that the outlet that you felt like you were able to like re-find her in?
Yeah, I think that there was a few reasons, and I don't think I really knew what they were until I sort of started writing this book. It would be, you know, it was very simple to think like, oh, well, it was how, you know, in some ways it was how my mother expressed her love in a lot of ways. Like my mom, every time I came home from college, would prepare this meal like 3 days in advance, where she like marinated the meat for like my arrival, and like got all the ingredients, like stocked the fridge with all of the things that I love to eat. Not just Korean things, but like things from my hometown of Eugene, Oregon, that I love to eat. And I didn't even realize it for a long time that was the way that she sort of expressed her affection for me. So there was that, but it was also, I think I realized there was this major sort of psychological undoing of the kind of failure that I felt as a caretaker, that I wasn't sort of able to prepare these dishes for her when she was sick, and that this woman, Kay, who came to live with us, kind of took over this role that I felt like I really I needed to do in order to be there for her, in order to complete this sort of cycle as a daughter that you feel like you're going to have to assume someday when it comes time. And I felt like so much shame, I think, as a caretaker, for not knowing how to make these dishes, that the first dish that I learned how to make after she passed away was the dish that this woman kept making for her, which was this pine nut porridge. And I think, like, in retrospect, it was very much that, and also being mixed race, feeling like if I don't actively preserve this part of my identity, I'm going to lose it. And so it became this sort of ritual for me to interact with, you know, every day for 30 minutes to an hour to 2 hours, where I would make something for myself, and I would think about her and also think about my cultural heritage, and feel like I was actively trying to preserve it in some way.
Right, and like just making like those little practices every day. And you talk about watching the YouTube videos and going to buy things, and there is like this whole, I mean, I just think the active like practice of trying to preserve that is something that a lot of people can probably feel lost in. And you talk about feeling like stuck between sort of an intersection. And I just thought that the way you talk about preserving that is really amazing. And I wanted to ask if you had like a favorite dish that she made you, and if you have now started to make it.
Yeah, I mean, there's little things that I'll always think about. Her kimchi jjigae, which is like a kimchi stew that like is probably every Korean person's like comfort food. I know how to make that pretty well, and I have this memory of the way that she made it. And it helped to have Mangchi, who's this Korean YouTube blogger, kind of like lay down the basics and be like, okay, my mom wouldn't have used like a dashi. She used just like a meat, like pork belly instead. And so I would sub these things in, and now I feel like pretty confident making that. Or there's a dish called jjajangmyeon, which are like these Chinese Korean fusion black bean noodles that I remember specifically my mom always saying, like, the trick to that is like you add a lot of onions. So like every time I make that, I'm always like, lots of onions.
Yeah, you like feel like you can add it. Because you also talk about the way that like you would ask her to make things, and she was like, you just do however much of this and this, and like not have being specific. And I have recipes from my mom where like I see her make them, but I think if she would then try to explain it to me, like she'll give it to me and she's like a handful of this, and I'm like, well, I don't know what a handful is.
Our hands are different sizes.
I know. I'm sort of trying to translate it, but do you have like your own dish that you feel like now is yours?
Yeah, what am I making lately? I don't know if I've like made anything too new. I guess I like learned how to make and there's this thing called dotorimuk, which is like an acorn jelly, which sounds really weird that my mom never made, but I went to this place in Seoul, and I had this like amazing side dish. It's like it's made out of acorn starch, and it's like kind of like a jello. It sounds really weird, but it's really good. And it's like mixed with sesame oil and seaweed and kimchi, and it's a really delicious like salad that's healthy and vegetarian. So, yeah.
I also love like when you talk about finding your mom's kimchi fridge in Peter's parents' house, and also all of the photographs. Like, did she document your whole life in pictures, or was she in them, or was it mostly just pictures of you and of your family?
Yeah, that's a great question. My parents always expressed like remorse over the fact that their parents never took photos, and I guess like to be fair, like when they were growing up, it was probably much more expensive, but I think they always felt like neglected in some ways. Like they both come from larger families. Like my dad was the youngest of 4 and raised by a single mom, and my mom was like the middle child, and her family had all these photos of her younger sister because she was her grandmother's favorite, and she had all the money. So all of the photos are just of like the youngest sister, and so I think because they both had this like sadness that there weren't that many photos from their childhood, and that's why like in the book, like this is like kind of a rare photo of like this was my mom, and this is her like beloved younger sister who we have like a bunch of photos of. So this was kind of like a rare thing for me to find these old photos of her, because she was always saying like, oh, they never took photos of me. And also being an only child and having this homemaker for a mother, I think she went wild with it. She has so many photos of me as a child, like from every age, just like perfectly documented. And it's just me. There's some of us together, but it's largely my mom like obsessing over like her little beloved only.
Oh yeah. I mean, and I'm a second child, and I feel like there's a million pictures of my older brother, and then by the second one, my parents were like, and I also like you retell the story of taking care of your mother in that time, with such detail. Did you journal, or how did you recall that experience in like such extreme detail?
Yeah, I am one of those people where like every every single year I make a resolution to keep a journal, and I like keep one from like the month of January and then fall off.
Yeah.
And I wish I did, because I think that it would be, it's so tremendously helpful for writing. I think I had like snippets here and there of you know, it's like when you're writing a memoir, it's kind of like you're poring over evidence, like no matter how small. So there would be like little snippets of diaries that I kept in May of one year that I would use part of, and then I never wrote about it again. And then a lot of it was just like free writing for, you know, every day, and like seeing what weird little like things followed, and also just like actively thinking about this moment of your life for 5 years, I think helps to just sort of like, you start kind of training your brain to kind of like constantly start pocketing away things that could fit into different chapters and stuff.
Right.
So yeah, I didn't really have much of a journal. I do feel like if I were to write another book, I would definitely want to write, like I would want to keep a journal and write from that experience, because I think it is a really excellent hobby to partake in.
Yeah, I'm the same. I'll do it for like the month of January and then stop. And I always wish, like, I'll look back at pictures and I'm like, I wish I had a journal from that time. So
yeah.
But you have this whole entire book that I think captures it, you know, incredibly. And are there other books that inspired you to write this, or was it just like you felt like you just needed to get it out?
Oh, I definitely read a ton of memoir. I never read much memoir before, sort of like training for this book. But yeah, I was watching your introduction, and or not introduction, but just like the beginning of your video, and you mentioned Joan Didion's Your Magical Thinking, and that book, and the Blue Hours, I think is what it's called.
Blue Nights, yeah.
Those two books about grief, I think are so tremendous, and were definitely huge influences on the book. There's a writer named MFK Fisher that my creative writing professor recommended to me, who wrote this book called The Gastronomical Me and Consider the Oyster. And she has some like really old school, like amazing food writing that I just loved. I loved Ruth Reichel's Tender at the Bone, another amazing food memoir. Nora Ephron's Heartburn. I love David Sedaris's short fiction. I love, I guess short fiction or nonfiction. And I love Anthony Bourdain's food writing. I really love this novel called The Vegetarian by Han Kang, who's a Korean writer who kind of writes about, it's kind of like the more horrifying aspect of food. It's about this woman who kind of like develops an eating disorder, but it's like more haunting, like even more haunting than that. There's like an element of sort of magical realism, and reading that like really made me think about how important it was to write this food memoir that also encompassed the way that food can be really horrific and traumatizing, you know. I mean, I feel like that was a really important portion of the book, where like we lose this real love and passion for food because we're counting calories and monitoring her eating, and chemotherapy makes it very difficult for my mom to want to eat anything or maintain her weight. So that book was also really influential on this writing process.
Yeah, and you talk about like keeping the journals of how much food she ate. Do you feel like having a task like that made you feel a little bit like you could remove yourself at times and just, you know, handle that task rather than the, I'm sure, emotional roller coaster that it was?
Yeah, it felt like, you know, this math will save.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a big part of it. I mean, I think that that's a really human thing to like try to like create illusions of control, you know. And I think that that was a very big thing, where I was like running a lot. I was like never exercised in my life before my mom got sick, and then like suddenly I'm running 5 miles an hour, like convincing myself that if I do that it will somehow help everyone. And like just adding up her calories every day, and like monitoring like her medications and what she ate was, you know, I mean, you just feel so helpless, that I think that it's pretty common to like create these weird like work like regimens, you know, to make you feel like you're helping in some way.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very human practice. And do you think that you would write another book?
Yeah, I do actually.
Yeah.
I feel like you just learn so, I just learned so much about writing a book
Hmm.
through
And
writing
I'm
the
sure
book.
about yourself too.
Yeah, I learned so much about myself, but also just like the like nerdy craft stuff, and like I think also
Hmm.
just having the confidence to, like that I've written it before, and like so much of the first one is kind of like feeling around in the dark, being like, I don't know if I'm like doing this right. And now that
Hmm.
I like had this sort of validation of just like, you did okay, kid,
Yeah,
it's fine.
I think
It's
you did
fine.
okay.
Like I do feel like I could apply like so much of what I learned from this one, and also have so much more confidence like going into a second one. Though I'm sure
Mhm.
similar to like writing a record, there will be like this kind of fear of the sophomore slump in a way.
Right, right. Well, thank you so much for coming on and also for writing this book. I just think you captured grief and food in such an amazing way. And like I said before, like I've only found that in Joan Didion, and I and you also like I just felt like your mother lived so much in this book, and I think everyone who read that felt that. So thank you for telling this story, and hopefully we get more from you.
Thank you so much, Kaia. Thank you for having
Thank
me.
you. Well, thank you guys so much for watching. If you haven't yet, please go read Crying in H Mart. As you can see, I wore mine down very much, but it's such a beautiful memoir. And also, her new album Jubilee is out, so go listen to that. And yeah, I can't wait for more book club.